Thank you for putting nuclear disarmament on the agenda. This is something Peace Alliance Winnipeg has been doing for quite a long time, as long as I can remember, actually. I think working on the Lantern Festival in particular, with Project Peacemakers, the Japanese community, Council for Canadians, the Quakers now, and various other groups to keep us thinking about this on a yearly basis and on other occasions as well. The particular context that we find ourselves in now is one in which, since about 2012, there's been a renewed nuclear arms race, and there'd been previously some success in bringing creating a reduction in nuclear armaments and achieving a little bit of momentum towards making it less of a danger. And it's gone very definitely in the other direction in the last several years. And in the last year in particular, there has been a renewed commitment on the part of the United States and Russia for major technological advances in nuclear weaponry and huge investment in this. The other major nuclear powers, Britain and China, are also doing that, and I presume that the others are to lesser degrees engaged in the same kind of modernization and intensification of preparations for nuclear war. At the same time, we want to be aware of the fact that nuclear proliferation is still an issue, and responses to it we see all the time in the news right now about the situation regarding Iran or Korea. So those are some of the major things before us. A significant response to that takes the form of the movement toward a nuclear ban. And the nuclear ban movement, I suppose it's not entirely new, but there's a sense in which its timing does just begin to ramp up as it's as if it's, and probably it is, a response to the renewed nuclear arms race. So that it really started with the conferences of the last few years that then resulted in the treaty last year. So one of the things we really want to keep in mind is the nuclear ban movement. So these are all the things that are the background to why we might be talking about nuclear disarmament, and why I think that it's, maybe it'd be on your agenda every year, but why it's particularly on the agenda this year is what is to be done about this now. So in terms of the things that we might presently talk about, there was going to be a high-level conference at the UN about the Non-Proliferation Treaty in the middle of May, and it has just been indefinitely postponed. I don't know if people are aware of that. And this was going to be a venue. The non-aligned states had wanted to call this meeting, and there was a lot of planning also for an NGO forum and so on, and it's only just been announced that they've deferred it. And the preparation meetings had hit some snags, and an announcement hasn't been made about its deferral, but the General Assembly was called to make the decision to postpone it, which is a pretty major decision. And presumably this means that it's hit some kind of snag in terms of what's likely to be able to be accomplished in this meeting. So that's a subject of concern. One of the other things that I thought might be on our mind, or that I brought to share with you, is that the Canadian Network to Abolish Nuclear Weapons was just holding a meeting in Ottawa, which was to some extent about preparing for those meetings that were expected to happen in May. And they developed a policy statement and circulated it, and I don't know if that reached Peace Alliance Winnipeg? Okay.
No, didn't see it.
Okay, so I'm not absolutely certain about its status. I happen to have seen it because for the last little while I've been, I went on the National Board of Voice of Women last summer. And so, this is a context in which people are in touch with a variety of different organizations, and we're a member of CNANW. So somebody was at these meetings, and we were also asked to sign on to this, and our board decided that it wasn't going to sign on to the particular statement that the CNANW drafted at this point. So I thought that you might have heard of this, or some of these, to some extent, this letter also talks about the kinds of issues that we might be considering in terms of advancing in the various international fora or in our work about the different things that can be done. And the problem, if you're wondering why there was something here on nuclear disarmament we didn't agree to, the board was split on this. So it's not as if certainly there was some feeling that we do want to engage with everybody on these issues and participate in all discussions. The particular problem with this was that the proposal being put forward was that we engage with NATO as a force for movement forward on this issue. And well, I know, so that's the problem. So the idea was to try to get NATO on side for the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And since our position is to oppose NATO, we weren't particularly happy with that. I also think that moving NATO on this particular subject would be extremely challenging. I mean, it's not going to happen. So, okay. So that's one of the issues that you may find discussed if you're looking at the national movement on the nuclear disarmament issue, which is that some people are trying to work in a persuasive way with NATO. And you may want to discuss that. You may want to see the arguments that the Canadian Network for Nuclear Disarmament has put forward. So and on some level, you can look at the documents. NATO's documents do in fact sort of commit itself to nuclear disarmament. So this is an attempt to leverage that in a positive way and say NATO's committed to doing this, so shouldn't it do it? And you can sort of see a certain kind of logic to that. But on the other hand, NATO is taking direction, I would argue, from the United States, and it's not particularly likely to move in that direction. So you can consider what you would want to do on that point. That doesn't strike me as particularly positive. There are a number of other steps that we could take. It argues for de-alerting all nuclear weapons because they're on alert for immediate use, right? And that's a dangerous situation. It's calling to see modernizing and expanding nuclear arsenals. I think we could be on side with that. It wants to engage all nuclear states in bilateral and multilateral engagement. It wants all nuclear armed states to agree to no first use. It wants everyone to sign on to the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. And it wants to and then implement some of its policies. It wants to take action on the weapons-grade fissile material, which our government is in fact acting on, but it's not perhaps the major issue. And wants to divert those resources into good purposes. So I think the other things we could sort of agree with, and some of the things that I thought we might want to discuss as possible kinds of actions. You can discuss, if you like, the question of whether you want to try to influence NATO or try to get Canada out of NATO. Those are probably reasonably long-term goals at the present moment. We could join the call for a national movement to sign on to the nuclear ban treaty. And I think that's probably a good thing to do, although I don't see our government doing that anytime soon. But I think that we should probably consider joining that particular movement, because in many practical ways, it just consists of publicity and signing a petition. I don't know that I'd want to put it at the absolute top of the agenda because it is so not likely to happen anytime soon. But I think that we could keep that going. The movement to engage with discussions with the around the Non-Proliferation Treaty is probably a good idea whenever that happens again. Moving on Canadian military spending is a good idea. I think that one of the things that we might want to particularly watch out for, to the extent that Canada could have some kind of influence on it, would be some kind of a reinforcement of international institutions in support of continuing the agreement about Iran. So that does not get out of control. We would want to continue to keep the Middle East from getting involved in a nuclear arms race. I don't know that Canada has a great deal of influence on that, but to the extent that we do, I think we might want our voice to be heard about the importance of this negotiated restriction, because it's not just about Iran not having nuclear weapons, it's about the Middle East not getting into a nuclear arms race. The other thing that we could be working on, and perhaps could work on a little bit more, is the situation in Korea, because Canada has had some interest in that, and something is conceivably moving on that front. And it is important not just because of what of North Korea in itself acquiring a capacity to use nuclear weapons. It's because if North Korea has a really functioning nuclear deterrent or nuclear capacity, that means that we're going to have even more of an extension of the American nuclear presence in Northeast Asia. The prospect of Japan and South Korea really becoming nuclear powers themselves, or at least Japan doing so. South Korea may just stay more firmly within the American nuclear umbrella. It utterly destabilizes Northeast Asia and produces another extreme point of tension in terms of conventional warfare and nuclear warfare. So, if we're tempted to be a little bit calm about North Korea, thinking there are all these countries in the world that don't have that have nuclear weapons but aren't actually using them right now, I think we shouldn't be too calm about North Korea because of what it sets in motion. If there isn't some kind of an agreement that constitutes some kind of a pullback. So the current negotiations that the two Koreas are managing to start could involve a de-escalation and demilitarization to some degree of Northeast Asia and some degree of denuclearization of the North is an important thing for us to be supporting. And there has been some action in Canada to do that. People may or may not be aware that some part of the movement, an important part of the movement in South Korea for peace was Women Across the DMZ in 2015. That did include Janice Olton from Voice of Women in 2015. And Women Across DMZ came and approached women in Canada to try to help continue this movement last year with the idea of doing something that comes out of the Vietnam era with having North and South Korean women meet in Canada, which didn't work because the North Korea wasn't willing to do that at that point. But that did initiate some kind of movement with Women Across DMZ, with Voice of Women, with the Nobel Women's Initiative, and with the United Church of Canada, which has had a missionary presence before when it was Methodist as well, and a huge presence in both North and South Korea, and a capacity and a willingness to speak for peace. So these came together and had a presence at the Foreign Ministers meeting in January. Not an effective presence because they heard us and they had a civil society forum and they met in a small group with us. Christian Freeland met with us, but still the final communique was not at all what anybody would have wished. So this is still continuing. There's some interest in the Canadian government in trying to have something that is not overly militaristic as a response to the situation in Korea. I think there's some little movement of being able to have some influence, and it's supported to a degree by the Korean community in Canada, which includes people from North Korea as well as from the South. So we may wish to have some interest and continuing support on that. And so it's all a reason, except perhaps for Iran and Korea. If we think we can influence those negotiations, everything else is reasonably long-term. And I guess we're working on that for a long while. But those are the issues that I think we could possibly be talking about.